Welcome back to 105 by 68 Power. In the previous episode, we began unpacking the question of why people own football clubs, moving beyond financial logic to explore ownership as a source of power, status, and symbolic control. We looked at why profit is rarely the primary motivation, how football functions as a power multiplier, and how ownership reshapes social positioning and identity, both locally and globally. In this episode, we continue that same line of analysis, focusing on what football ownership produces once visibility and identity are already established. We will look more closely at political capital, geopolitical strategy, entertainment logic, and the non-financial returns that ultimately explain why clubs are held, protected, and fought over, even when the numbers do not add up. Our first topic of the day is political capital and visibility. As football clubs operate at the intersection of public emotion and collective identity, it is almost inevitable that ownership generates political capital, even when owners have no explicit political ambitions. Visibility at the scale creates recognition, and recognition, over time, becomes a form of legitimacy that extends beyond the sporting domain. In its most explicit form, this legitimacy can translate into name recognition that is difficult to achieve through traditional political or institutional pathways. Ownership places individuals in the public eye on a continuous basis, associating them with a symbol that already carries widespread attention and emotional investment. This can, in some cases, serve as a platform for electoral campaigns or appointments to formal roles, particularly in contexts where popularity and familiarity play a significant role in public life. However, focusing only on these explicit outcomes risks missing the more pervasive and often more influential dynamics at play. In many cases, the political value of football ownership is not exercised through ballots or offices, but through informal access and agenda setting. Owners become recognizable interlocutors for political actors, not because of formal authority, but because of the social and symbolic weight of the club they represent. This creates channels of influence that are subtle but persistent. Invitations, consultations, and informal conversations occur more easily when an individual is associated with a major cultural institution. The club functions as a shared reference point, reducing distance between private actors and public decision-makers, and facilitating interaction within a framework that feels legitimate and socially accepted. Another important dimension is alignment with national or regional symbolism. Football clubs often embody local pride, historical narratives, or national identity, and owners who are closely associated with these symbols can benefit from a form of borrowed legitimacy. Their actions and positions may be perceived as aligned with broader collective interests, even when no explicit political statement is made. This dynamic becomes particularly significant in foreign jurisdictions. Ownership of a football club can provide soft legitimacy in environments where economic actors might otherwise be viewed with suspicion or distance. The club acts as a cultural intermediary, allowing owners to be perceived not merely as external investors, but as participants in the local social fabric. It is important to underline that none of this requires direct political ambition. Often, the most durable form of political capital generated through football ownership is agenda-setting power, the ability to shape conversations, priorities, and perceptions simply by being present within the public sphere. In that sense, football does not replace politics, but it quietly reshapes the terrain on which political influence operates. This takes us to our final topic of the day, football as a geopolitical and strategic tool. When football ownership is examined at a global scale, it becomes clear that clubs can function as geopolitical instruments, operating far beyond the logic of sport or commerce. In this context, football clubs act as soft power assets, capable of shaping perceptions, building familiarity, and opening doors in ways that traditional diplomatic or economic tools often cannot. This is largely because football bypasses many of the frictions that normally accompany international relations. Political systems, regulatory frameworks, and historical tensions can slow or complicate formal engagement, whereas football enters societies through emotion, culture, and entertainment. It speaks a language that is immediately understood and widely accepted regardless of borders. As a result, football ownership is sometimes used as a form of reputation management, a phenomenon often described as sport washing. In these cases, association with a popular and emotionally charged institution helps reframe how an individual, organization, or even a state is perceived internationally. The club becomes a vehicle through which alternative narratives are projected, emphasizing modernity, ambition, or openness rather than controversy or conflict. What makes this strategy effective is not deception, but proximity. By embedding capital within a beloved cultural institution, owners reduce distance between themselves and foreign publics. The club functions as an international trust proxy, creating familiarity before scrutiny and emotional engagement before political judgment. Crucially, emotional legitimacy often precedes institutional legitimacy. Long before governments, regulators, or international bodies formally recognize an actor as legitimate, football audiences may already have accepted them as part of their cultural landscape. This early acceptance reshapes the context in which later political or economic interactions take place. Over time, this process can generate strategic advantages. Partnerships become easier to establish, resistance softens, and conversations that might otherwise be confrontational are reframed within a more neutral or even positive emotional context. Football does not replace diplomacy, but it conditions the environment in which diplomacy operates. Seen from this perspective, football clubs are no longer primarily commercial entities. Their value lies less in revenue generation and more in their ability to project influence, normalize presence, and stabilize relations across borders. They become strategic assets embedded within broader geopolitical strategies. This explains why, in certain cases, clubs are held regardless of financial performance, and why significant losses are tolerated over long periods. The return is not measured in profit, but in perception, access, and long-term positioning. Football, in this sense, becomes a tool of strategy rather than a business, and ownership becomes a means of operating on the global stage through emotion rather than force.
Next topic is the show business investment logic.
Another way to understand football ownership, particularly in recent decades, is to look at it through the lens of show business rather than traditional industry. Football clubs increasingly resemble entertainment intellectual property, assets whose value lies not primarily in production efficiency, but in storytelling, audience engagement, and long-term brand relevance.
This perspective helps explain why football has begun to attract the same types of investors who, in other contexts, have targeted media companies, film catalogs, music rights, or motorsport platforms. These investors are not necessarily interested in running clubs day to day. They are interested in owning a piece of a global entertainment engine whose relevance grows over time.
The logic is similar to what has already happened in motorsport, where investment funds and institutional capital have acquired stakes in championships, teams, or commercial rights. Formula-based competitions, in particular, have demonstrated how a sport can be reframed as a scalable content platform with predictable calendars, global broadcasting, and monetizable narratives that extend far beyond the race itself.
In the United States, this logic has long been applied to franchise sports leagues, where teams are not treated as isolated businesses but as shares within a closed ecosystem. Scarcity of supply, revenue sharing, and controlled expansion have allowed franchises to appreciate steadily over time, often independent of short-term sporting performance.
Football, while structurally different, is increasingly perceived through a similar lens. From this point of view, the club becomes an entertainment asset whose value can be amplified through brand expansion, global outreach, digital content, and strategic repositioning. The investment rationale is not purely operational, but narrative-driven. Buy, amplify, reposition, and potentially exit at a higher valuation.
What matters here is not just revenue growth, but relevance growth. A club that becomes more globally recognizable, more culturally embedded, and more visible across platforms is perceived as a stronger asset, even if its financial statements remain volatile. This mirrors dynamics in film studios or media libraries, where long-term brand strength outweighs individual project performance.
A crucial difference, however, sets football apart from most other entertainment industries. Football does not require the creation of an audience. The emotional demand already exists, often deeply rooted in history, geography, and identity.
Investors are not building fandom from scratch, they are acquiring control over an existing emotional ecosystem. This dramatically alters the risk profile. In film or media, success depends on predicting audience taste. In football, the audience is structurally captive. Supporters may disengage emotionally at times, but they rarely disappear. This persistence makes football particularly attractive as a long-term content generator, even when short-term performance fluctuates.
Because of this, football clubs can be treated as narrative engines. Matches are only the core product. The surrounding stories, rivalries, transfers, personalities, and controversies generate continuous content. Every season renews the storyline, providing fresh material without the need to reinvent the underlying product.
This helps explain why some investors are comfortable with minority stakes or partial ownership. Much like motorsport funds buying a slice of the cake, they are less concerned with control and more interested in exposure to an appreciating entertainment asset. The goal is not dominance, but participation in long-term value creation.
In this framework, exit is optional rather than essential. Some investors aim for resale once the club's profile has been elevated. Others are content to hold indefinitely, benefiting from appreciation, influence, or strategic alignment with other assets. What unites these approaches is the recognition that football behaves less like manufacturing and more like media.
Seen this way, football ownership becomes intelligible within a broader shift in global capital, where attention, narrative, and cultural relevance are increasingly treated as assets in their own right. The club is no longer just a team, it is a platform. And platforms, when scarcity and emotion are combined, tend to grow in value over time.
8. Local embeddedness and legacy projects. While much of modern football ownership is discussed in global terms, it is important to recognize that a significant number of ownership models remain deeply local in nature. In these cases, the motivation is not primarily expansion, visibility, or global positioning, but embeddedness within a specific community that often predates the owner's financial success.
This dynamic is particularly common in family ownership structures, regional entrepreneurs, and long-established industrial dynasties. For these owners, the football club represents a symbolic extension of their relationship with the territory, functioning as a visible marker of belonging and commitment rather than as a detached investment vehicle.
One of the most frequently cited motivations in these contexts is the idea of giving back. Owners who have built successful businesses within a particular region may see club ownership as a way to reinvest part of that success into the social fabric that enabled it. The club becomes a shared asset, one that visibly benefits the community and reinforces a sense of mutual recognition.
However, it would be misleading to interpret this purely as altruism. Reinforcing local goodwill also generates strategic advantages. By associating their name with a collective institution that carries emotional value, owners convert private success into public gratitude. This gratitude, while intangible, has real effects on perception, tolerance, and long-term influence.
Over time, this process can create a form of social immunity. Owners who are seen as custodians of a community asset often benefit from greater patience during periods of sporting or financial difficulty. Criticism does not disappear, but it is moderated by recognition of past contributions and perceived alignment with local interests.
This immunity extends beyond football itself. Owners embedded in the local identity of a club often enjoy broader legitimacy within regional economic, political, and cultural networks. Their voice carries weight not because of formal authority, but because it is associated with continuity, stability, and shared history.
Legacy is another central element in this ownership pattern. Football clubs provide a rare opportunity to create a lasting public imprint that survives individual careers or business cycles. For families or dynasties, the club becomes a transgenerational project, linking names and narratives across time in a way few other assets can.
In this sense, local football ownership produces returns that are slow, cumulative, and resilient. They do not fluctuate with market conditions in the same way financial assets do, but instead operate through memory, identity, and long-term relationships. The club becomes both a symbol and a shield, anchoring the owner within the community while extending their influence well beyond the boundaries of sport.
That's all for today. In the next episode, we'll conclude this 3-part series with the third and final part of Why Own a Club? Power, Identity, and Non-Financial Returns.
This is 105 by 68 Power.